think when Marx would look at this, then he'd let's imagine, because he's your friend, he's a decent chap, and he said, "I'm really sorry. Oh my goodness, that revolutionary stuff, I really got that wrong, and I'm really apologetic." But he wouldn't be that. But the other stuff, this bit of the technology, shifting capitalism to a point where, there are now the machines are doing creating the wealth. What do we do? That's something that perhaps wouldn't surprise him very much, and he would probably want to sit down and think, right, okay, well, what do we do about this? Is that the kind of situation you think Marx, if he was a decent chap, would perhaps, he wouldn't be that surprised?
Well, it wouldn't be surprising to him, except he didn't look on it as necessarily, I mean, he saw it as a disaster, really, basically, because it meant that working people were no longer able to work.
Right.
So the good side of it, which is that you relieve people from this huge burden. I mean, Marx never went down a mine to work, and he never went into a factory to work, as far as I know. He doesn't know the horrors of hard physical work. I've watched it in the Himalayas and elsewhere, and I haven't talked about it in any of my talks. But people who are sentimental about the joys of physical labor, they should try it.
Absolutely. My brother's was down the pit, and I asked him the other day, he's retired now, and he said, I hated it. He said it's horrible.
It's absolutely foul. And, one of the great achievements in the last century or so is to lift for a certain part of the world the appalling drudgery of manual work, particularly bad in Asia, because you worked even harder there. But, not to have to do those things is wonderful. But Marx wasn't really interested in that. He would have liked, in some ways, them to go on in the factories and mines, but they weren't going to, and that was going to lead to a revolution. The other thing that he would have, perhaps he hadn't anticipated, is that the machines were moving into another part of the human body. The ones that he knew about, and that was technology through the ages, which was machines for extensions of the arms and legs and back. In other words, physical work. And the factories and mines were about using the body. What he hadn't anticipated, and none of us could anticipate it, was that Turing would invent a machine that would replace the human brain. In other words, think better than us. Not necessarily more creatively, but much, much faster and more logically and repetitively. And so without strain or tiring, doing things which millions of human beings couldn't do. And that revolution, that moment when Turing said they can learn and they can get better and better and better, that moment, which we have now reached, where, in about 20 years, 25 years, there will be supercomputers, maybe much less now. That was the old prediction, which have the brain power of all the people on this planet combined. That moment is approaching, and we have to wonder what we're going to do then.
So at least not a lot of good things coming out of the Marx thing. Then it's a bit scary, but at the same time, it's where we are.
But I do have a solution to that. What we're going to do is all find a Richard to whom we can every Sunday morning have a chat.
I keep asking you,
and have wonderful interviews, because I think that's the point at which probably, as I'm just off to have my second COVID jab this afternoon, and I need to go and have lunch and prepare for that. It's an optimistic moment, because what I hope I've tried to convey in all my talks, and this one among others, is that we're in a situation where we really know the technical side of the solution to almost all human problems. We know how to supply fresh drinking water. We know what to do about global warming. We know what to do about most health problems and inequalities. I mean, a school child, certainly someone at university, if you say, this is the problem, tell me the solution, they can write it down. the thing that's lacking is will, political. We've got to will the means, and we've also got to be accurate about the problem. And so a lot of my more recent work has been about explaining, for example, in my book on how can we survive, looking at history and anthropology and psychology to see where we've got to, defining the problem. And then once you know what the question is, you then do what Einstein suggests. You go up one level above the problem that was caused by, say, the Second Amendment to the American Constitution. You have the problem that people still seem to think that, you need to carry a submachine gun around to be safe. You can't just tinker with that sort of problem. You have to go right above it, and to think of something really dramatically different. You say to everyone, okay, you can't have a gun, but I'll give you a device which, if you press it, the police will be there straight away. Or, you can put a shield around yourself so that you are entirely protected and no one can attack you. No worries about other people. You don't need a gun to prevent gun crimes or anything. We will give you a solution to that question, but you've got to go right up out of the problem and then think of a much wider solution.
It's quite interesting that, but I was listening to an interview with the world chess champion, and he was asked about the effect of these computers now that can, beat him anytime. And he says, depressed. I would never for pleasure play a chess computer because it's depressing to get beaten every time. You can't win. It's a bit like asking Usain Bolt to race against a car. It doesn't matter. You can't do it, so don't do it. But he says but what you can do with them, and what these supercomputers, these chess playing computers have done for him and for the chess community is they've made chess less dogmatic, because the chess computer, because it can mine so many different options, it can show that a situation where at a glance you think this is white's advantage, the computer can see how it could actually be black's advantage if you go a little deeper. And it kind of links to what you just said there. You start looking at things at a different level. You see that actually what looked almost hardened into a dogma of this is how you open your chess game, this is how you finish it. None of that actually is necessarily the case anymore. And so it's a lot more open. So these games have opened up and the options are much bigger.
Well, that's a very good point to end on, because that puts it much better what I was trying to say, which is that we have always thought of ourselves as trapped by the past and by our present political system and economic system. What the very dramatic events, particularly of the last year of COVID, but the changing technologies and political system of the world show us that we can dream of an entirely new and alternate future.
Yeah.
The difficulty is the dreaming, because if you continue along the tendency where you are, then you will never escape from it. But watching that very good series on chess, for example, there was a film on Netflix which was very popular, and there you began to see some of this. You saw cases where, and I've been watching films on chess, where one side said, are you going to surrender? Because, there's no way out of this. And these master chess players would think and go away and talk to their friends in California on their phones or whatever the device in the film was. And they come in and say, no, it's not over.
Well, Bobby Fischer the thing about Bobby Fischer was he would never surrender. So that even when he took it to such an extreme that even when there were just the two kings left on the board, he would keep playing. he got down to that and played two moves before he actually said it stopped. So I think you're right. I think this idea of getting away from the dogmas of the past and freeing yourself up through dreams is exactly what we need.
The motto of someone who is now approaching his 80th year and going off for his second jab is keep playing.
Yes.